Welcome to the Kenoi Church Podcast. We're glad that you're interested in connecting through this teaching time. If you'd like to connect further, feel free to reach out to us through our website, kenoichurch.org. For now, enjoy this teaching from Kenoi Church, where our mission is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ.
Well, good morning, everybody. Children, you are welcome to leave if you want to. Not into the parking lot, but right up here, I think, huh? Well, thanks so much. It's great to be with you all this morning. Again, I'm Bryan, and I help to give leadership to an area of churches in the family called the Brethren of Christ Church, of which you all are a vital part. So it's great to be here with you this morning and to celebrate and to worship. I want to begin by just saying thank you. Thank you for your desire to love and follow Jesus, both who you are as an individual, but then also coming together as a church. And thank you for extending that love beyond yourselves, generously just giving to those around you, whether it's your neighbors or your coworkers or somebody you bump into the store. Thanks for being the hands and feet of Jesus around you. I also want to thank you. I don't know if you know this, but you all are supporting missionaries all around the world. You're planting churches both here in our region and actually across the United States. You're doing that because you all are generous to the family we're a part of, and we do certain ministries in common across every Brethren of Christ church across the U.S. And some of the key things we do is support missionaries who are going into areas that you and I probably couldn't go into because, one, we don't know the local customs, two, we don't know the language, and they're able to share Jesus. And they're able to do it because you and I and others support them. And we're planting new churches, we're multiplying. Not far down the road in Lancaster City, actually in the last month and a half, another church multiplied in Lancaster City thanks to you and many other churches across the family of BIC. Yes. So if you don't know it, you all aren't just making an impact with your own lives and what you're doing. And Kenoi as a church, I think the fair was just recently, right? I know something this church is known for at that fair, right? So you're impacting lives there, and not just there, but all over the place. So thanks. It's good to be family together, and you're making an impact. I want to encourage you to continue to do so now more than ever. Lean in to Jesus. That's what we were just encouraged to do and what he has for you. Lean into community here and rely on one another. Lean into the mission of Jesus across the region, the country, and around the world, and continue to be the church of Jesus here at Kenoi. We're going to continue in a series this week that Nick began last week, which is focused on the book of James. And my sense of what the book of James is all about is this should be a help to you and I, not only individually, but as a church, to be the church of Jesus. James is one of the shorter books towards the end of the New Testament of the Bible, and really the emphasis is really to be a practical guide for how you and I can follow Jesus, live the Jesus life in the areas of things that we commonly face. So I trust not only this morning, but as you keep digging into this writing, that you'll find that you'll find handles, encouragements, challenges on how to be the people of Jesus. Now, my understanding is Nick just kind of gave you an intro last week, and you never actually got into the book of James. It was kind of the overarching picture. So this morning, we're actually starting at the beginning, a very good place to start. James 1:1 through verse 11. So I'm going to read that. If you have a Bible and you'd like to follow along, you can turn it on or flip it open, or you can just listen. So this is what James has to say, verses 1 through 11. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. Those who doubt should not think they will receive anything from the Lord. They are double-minded and unstable in all they do. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossoms fall and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away, even while they go about their business. Would you pray with me? Jesus, as was already prayed, and as we've already sung, would you open our eyes, our hearts, including my own, so that we can hear from you. So the parts where I may get in the way, help them to tune that out. And the parts where we really need to hear from you, may we tune in. I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. So James, like many of the books of the New Testament, is actually a letter. So it begins in the typical way you'd expect any letter to begin. I mean, when you write a letter, what do? Dear so-and-so, and at the end you put who it's from. Typically, in this case, when they write a letter, right off the bat, you find out who it's to and who it's from. So right at the beginning, what's verse 1 tell us? This is James, a servant of God and of Jesus, who he refers to as the Jewish Messiah, whom James calls Lord. So right in that first line, he is equating Jesus with God, and James is subordinating himself. He's putting himself under both of those individuals. So who is James? Well, if you read in the New Testament, you'll actually find numbers of people named James. It wasn't a very uncommon name. So you read through and you're like, well, is it this person or that person? Well, maybe he'll tell us a little bit about himself. Nope, he just says, I'm a servant of God and of Jesus. So in other words, maybe the people he was writing to, he just assumed they would know who he was. Well, and if that's the case, and we look in the New Testament, I wonder who that person could be. Rather spending the whole time wondering about that, I'll just tell you what really wise people, far wiser than I, write about this and say. Even though there were multiple people named James, based on the timing and who he's writing to and what he writes, they say James was the brother of Jesus, who after Jesus' death and resurrection became a key leader in the church of Jerusalem. So if that key leader, kind of the home founding church, writes a letter out to everybody during that time, you can imagine why he didn't necessarily have to identify himself. He just said, hey, it's James. You know, the follower of Jesus, the servant of Jesus, and then goes on to tell them. So this is James, the brother of Jesus. Now think about that with me. I realize we're still only in the first line of this, but how many of you out here have siblings? This is participation time. All right, that's a lot of the crowd. Not all of you, but I have some as well. I have a brother and a sister. Both are younger, so I'm the oldest. My sister's about 6 years younger than me. My brother's 4 years younger than me. So growing up, I certainly had a relationship with my sister, but 6 years younger, you know, there's a pretty good stretch. So we didn't have key relationship with one another growing up. I'm grateful to say now with both of them, I think it's fairly healthy and good relationship. But at that point, we're kind of part of the same family. We're experiencing things together. But my brother was only 4 years younger than me. So we shared a lot more life together. We did things together. We had activities together and thought a little bit about that. Think about life if you have siblings, or maybe if you have children right now, what life is like between them as siblings. I can think of a few times where I maybe wasn't as kind as I should have been. As the older brother, 4 years older, of course, I'm always a bit of a stage ahead, maybe developed a stage ahead, and so used that power at times to exert my will over my little brother type of thing. Maybe not always in some kind ways. But there's probably far worse out there, and unfortunately, maybe some of us have experienced worse at the hands of our siblings, but fairly typical interactions with siblings. So let me ask you a question. What would it take for you to believe your sibling was God and to call him or her Lord? You get what I'm saying? Now, I'm not claiming Jesus growing up was awful to his siblings, including James, but still, he's the older brother. You grow up together. You know him as your brother. And it's actually clear throughout other spots in the New Testament of the Bible. If you read some of the Gospels that are the stories about Jesus, John, for instance, Jesus' family is mentioned in there. In fact, his brothers are mentioned specifically multiple times. Read the story and how those brothers or his family are described at different points through the life of Jesus. I'll give you a snapshot. They weren't overly encouraging towards Jesus. In fact, sometimes tried to goad him into something, or other times tried to hold him back. There is no indication throughout the life of Jesus that any of his brothers thought Jesus was anything more than their brother. What would it take for someone to believe their sibling was God and call him Lord, like I submit my life to you? You see, this is the opening line of James. And we see evidence of the core and the heart of the good news right there in the opening line. Because Jesus died, yes, but he rose from the dead. And he appeared to numbers of individuals, many of which wrote the letters of the New Testament, including James, his brother. In another letter, another man named Paul, who had his own unique encounter with Jesus, he wrote to a group of followers of Jesus in a town called Corinth. And in the midst of that letter, this is what we have. This is 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 through 7. I'm going to read it for you. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ, or Jesus, died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures. Verse 5, and that he appeared to Cephas, which is another name for Peter, and then to the 12, so the apostles. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living. Get that, at the time of this letter, when Paul is writing to them saying Jesus came back from the dead, he's saying all these people saw him, there's most of which are still living. You can go ask them, in other words. 500 brothers and sisters at the same time, most who are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Verse 7, then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also as one abnormally born. I think that would do it. Don't you? If someone predicts their death and resurrection and then pulls it off, that likely would be what it takes to not only believe he is who he says he is, but also orient all your life around that person. This is what James is claiming in the very opening of his letter by describing Jesus as his Lord and saying he's a servant of both God and Jesus. And it's no small claim. This is incredible. And I think before we even get into anything else James wrote, that should have bearing on our lives. That is the crux. Who do you and I say Jesus is? And what difference does that make in your life or in my life? James believes it should have a lot of bearing on our lives. In fact, it should be the defining characteristic. When we open a letter, we say, hey, I'm Bryan. I'm a servant of Jesus, the one who died and rose again. He's Lord of my life. That's the defining characteristic. And everything else should flow from it. And you see, we individually and collectively are the carriers of that good news. Jesus came not only to show us what God was like, but to in fact be God, because he is. In him, we have the opportunity for life, both in the here and now, We don't have to wait to heaven for real life. In fact, he wants to offer it to us in the here and now, and certainly in the life to come. He's the key. He died, he was buried, he rose again. The witnesses to that fact, they experienced it, and their lives were changed. And coming out of that transformation, they wrote these words down so other people would know and understand and could follow, and that their lives could be changed as well. And guess who some of those other people are? It's you and me. We're reading of those words today. We have the opportunity for that same life transformation. Have you experienced life that is truly life? If not, that's the starting place. And James continues in his letter, and probably something that's key for us to understand is he was writing to people who had experienced change in Jesus. He wasn't writing to just the broad community and any old person walking along the street. He actually was writing to those who would say, yes, I follow Jesus. So these principles that we're going to talk about, these practical ways to follow Jesus in our day-to-day life, they're directed towards those who would desire to do so. Because he addresses it to the 12 tribes, a Jewish reference, which as far as I can tell wasn't meant to limit this just to Jewish people, but in fact was more metaphorical, just to say God's people in Jesus, who are what? They're scattered about through multiple regions. And he gets practical with them about this Jesus life. He begins with an area they were well acquainted with. Maybe some of us are too. Trials. James writes about trials as if we could gain something from them, profit something from them. And his original audience, they wouldn't have been hard-pressed to come up with any examples. In fact, they were scattered for a reason. You see, persecution had broken out, so they couldn't stay where they were. So the people he's writing to, some of them had recently lost their homes. Some of them had lost their jobs. Others had lost the security, not only of those two things, but maybe even of community. Some would have had to run for their lives because they were at risk. They experience all of that, and how does James begin as he talks to them? What does he say? Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. Trials, an external adversity which provides a testing towards an end. And James communicates when in that spot, consider it a joy. A joy which is neither contrived or forced. I don't know about you, but that's not where I typically find myself. How do you respond to trials? It's not usually that. For me, my first response to a trial is to try to avoid it. Is there any way I could get around this? Like not have to go through whatever's in front of me? Because boy, I would be glad to do so right now. Yes? And then at some point the reality might hit me that, no, I'm in it. I can't just kind of go around it or bypass it. So maybe for some of us, our response to a trial is kind of just get real self-focused to try to nurse our wounds. Depending on how significant it is, maybe we curl up in a ball, we protect ourselves, right? Others, maybe we look for somebody to blame. Okay, I'm in this. Whose fault is it? Somebody's got to be blamed. Who can I blame? Maybe it's an individual. Right? We point to another person. Maybe it's a nameless group. Maybe it's an entity like the government, right? They're a good one to blame. Somebody's got to be blamed. Who is it? Maybe for some of us that blame begins to get directed at God. We begin to question, is God really who he says he is? I mean, if he was, why would I be going through this? Does he really care about me? Maybe he cares in general, but not about me. Or maybe we don't just blame God, for instance, but we assume he's left. Elvis has left the building. God or the Holy Spirit clearly isn't with me, or this would have never happened and wouldn't be happening right now. God, why aren't you with me any longer? For me, I think all of these types of responses are natural, normal. It's quite easy to go to those places in the midst of hard circumstances when we're being tested, when we're being pushed to the very extent that we think we can even bear as an individual. And James encourages us to respond with joy. That is a tough one. Why? Why does he write that? Because he believes we can profit from it. He takes a long view. Let me read verses 3 and 4 again. This is right after he says about joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. James looks towards the big picture, and he runs it through the lens of what we hope we will be like as followers, that we'll end up like Jesus. He's talking about the end result of trials, and he says, trials are a part of what can help us there, can get us to this end result. You see, they develop perseverance, a quality of unswerving constancy, active patience, steadfastness might be another word. And as we go through those trials, those qualities begin to be developed in us. And as good as that is, note that that's not the end goal. The end goal is actually maturity, completeness, not lacking anything as people. Now, I want to be real clear here so there's no confusion. God is not the author of evil, something horrific like these trials. In fact, as I trust Nick continues to think through and talk through this chapter and this book with all of you, just go a little farther in chapter 1, and James actually says that plain out. Now, it isn't God who brings those things about, or even desires those. There's a difference between causing and desiring and using. God is pretty clear that he will use all things in our lives if we allow him to do so. It doesn't mean that happened because God wanted it to happen. But James clearly understands what can come about through those types of circumstances. He sees that long term and he says, okay, the end goal is where we want to get to be fully mature, complete, deficient in no area. In other words, like Jesus, that's the end goal. And if this helps to develop it, and if I can keep my eyes there, then even in the process of these hard things, I can face them with joy, with inner peace, satisfaction, because I know in the end I'm becoming more like Jesus, completely who God envisions me to be. That's what's happening. And he says we can profit from that, and we can have joy. That's still a challenge, at least in my mind. But maybe for some of us, we think, okay, yeah, I can do that because we're not facing anything right now. You know, there's no big challenge in my life right now, so yeah, I can think about, yeah, it makes sense, joy. But boy, at some point, we're going to be, right? But what happens when you and I face trials with joy, and you and I persevere, and we gain that endurance, and then we become more and more like Jesus? What happens is then when we come together as Kenoi Brethren in Christ Church, Kenoi Brethren in Christ starts looking more and more like Jesus because I and you look more and more like Jesus. Author and pastor Alan Hirsch recently tweeted this: a church that does not look, act, think, sound like Jesus is probably not the church. Catch that? A church that does not look, act, think, sound like Jesus is probably not the church. Christ is the only legitimate measure of authentic church. So as you and I look, act, think, sound more like Jesus, then the church we come together to be a part of, and the church we come together to build, will also be more like Jesus. And that's exactly who the church should be. So consider joy in trials. That's a large challenge, but I get the point. I believe I can see that and trust it'll be the case. But it'll be a challenge to embody joy in some way without keeping a hold of that end potential. You see, that's why I need Jesus in the midst of trials as well. I don't want to just think about the end, but it's now, it's happening to me right now, and I need Jesus in the midst of that because I don't have this stuff naturally within me. Joy does not bubble over naturally when I'm in the midst of a trial. I need the strength and love of Jesus to help this take place. I need wisdom to be able to view it that way and understand what it could be in my life. And James moves there next. It's what he writes about next. You need wisdom? Great. Ask God. He gives generously. Remember, this is the character of God, not to enact bad things on us, but to give generously, including wisdom. And God is the source. He desires that we have wisdom that's beyond just human understanding. That as we realize our need, we ask and he gives generously, building us up, because that's his character. James goes on to give 2 examples of unhelpful ways of going about this. One is to be full of doubt. The other is to be double-minded, to try to go 2 ways at once. So he says belief or faith is critical to this. And I think, okay, I'm supposed to believe, I'm supposed to have faith. Again, another challenge, but I'm reminded of Jesus' words. Jesus taught some about belief, seeing the unseen, of faith. And as he's talking and teaching, I'm sure in his mind he's thinking, how can I compare this? What's the smallest thing I can think of that these people would know? A mustard seed. You know, people, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, that's all you need. You don't have to have this great big gigantic faith that overwhelms the world. No, if you're struggling, just faith as small as a pinhead. And that will do it. So when James says, ask with faith, I think, okay, I have that sort of faith. I can ask and believe that God will give wisdom. And then he says, but go in that same direction. Don't be double-minded. Don't be tossed back and forth like a wave does at the beach. Have you experienced that? The push and pull of the current, and I'm trying to go this way and it knocks me back. And I try to go this way and it pulls me forward, right? That's what this unstableness of mind is like that James is describing. He's saying, if you're seeking wisdom, don't go back, forth, being pulled like the waves, and the wind pushes the waves around. Believe that God can provide. And James writes, it'll be given to you. So quick recap, and then we'll get to the last one. Jesus is the key. He's the end point of all of this in the midst of life. As difficulties or trials come, they can produce joy if we keep that end goal in mind. Becoming more and more like Jesus, complete in him. And if we need wisdom along the journey, ask God. He gives it generously. One final area where wisdom is needed, James writes, in its relationship to money. And just like before, the reason James can write these things the way he does to the individuals of his day is because he has this long view in mind with Jesus. How can he write to those who have very little and say, oh, you're in a really good spot, you're going to be exalted? Or those who have a whole lot, excess in fact, and say, oh, you're going to be humbled. You have pride in this high position? Yeah, it's not going to last for very long. That's the opposite of what I think, right? That's the opposite of what it feels like. Again, I need wisdom. James says, you're taking way too short a view on this. Just the way trials work over the long haul, so riches have a luster that shines in the short term, but they don't produce what you think they're going to. They're a mirage, even if you think they produce right now. There's no long-term security in them, so don't put your hope in them. They wither like flowers in the sun with no water. Long-term, looking to money for what we really desire or ultimate security will look like flowers that wither. I don't know who brought this beautiful bouquet in this morning to kind of enliven the service, but thanks for doing so. They're beautiful, aren't they? Well, at one point they were. Not too long ago, actually. These were in front of my house, and they had little yellow petals on them called Black-Eyed Susans. Maybe some of you have them. Coolest thing about them is they spring up year after year, and I don't have to do a thing to help them grow, right? Just like wildflowers that grow and then eventually wither in the sun. That's what James is writing. He is saying, look at this, look at these beautiful flowers. That's actually what riches are like when you take the long-term view. Yes, right now they seem to provide all we need, provide all sorts of security. But at some point, their petals are going to fall off. The sun is going to come out, and it's going to wither. and they'll eventually look just like this beautiful bouquet of flowers. I need to hear that, and maybe I'm the only one in the room who needs to. As many times as I have heard that yes, money can do some very good things, but trusting in money or the love of money does some very bad things to the soul. As many times as I have heard that, or money is not actually going to provide the security I'm really looking for, I still at times get trapped in the, if I could just get this one more thing. Or if I could just get to this place in my life, then I'm going to be secure, then I can relax, then I can take it easy. How many times have I heard that, and yet I find myself ending up in the same trap? And James says, temporarily, maybe it'll provide, but that's not what we're really desiring. Our end goal, which isn't about next year or even 20 years from now, it's about who we're going to be and who we are in the most important parts of our being and who we're becoming. And in this opening section, James wants to change our lenses. He desires that we internalize a different perspective, one that's much longer in its view and focuses on what really matters. You see, James had experienced the risen Jesus, and when he did, his lenses were changed. He was so transformed as a person that he believed his brother was God. And he wanted the same for his hearers, including you and me, that we'd have a wake-up call, a new lens which impacts our lives in the day-to-day. Like many of you, I have spent some time over the last couple weeks thinking about 20 years ago. Any of you remember 20 years ago, last weekend? I've spent some time thinking back to that point in my life. My wife and I happened to be away over September 11th, 2001. We had 2 kids at the time. And this started happening, and after I started wrapping my mind around what was going on, and I wasn't fully sure what was going on, started to experience that, and I started thinking about being away from my girls and thinking, oh, I want to be near my girls. And at that time, in fact, my wife, Carrie, was pregnant with our 3rd daughter. And I started thinking about, oh my goodness, we're about to have another little child. We're bringing her into this world. What sort of world is she coming into? And for at least a time, it really shook my perspective on things. And it did many others as well. You know what? Who Jesus is and what he desires to do in and through our lives is to bring that same type of shaking our perspective. It's to change our lives, but even in more significant ways. Who we are at the very core is to be changed, is to be rocked, is to be reshaped by him, because he's the perfect picture of God. And we need to look more and more like him. As we do, those places where we intersect, like the church, like Kenoi, should have more and more of Jesus. When trials come, our responses should be different. When we need wisdom, we should seek it from a different source. And even our thoughts and understandings about money and wealth should be reshaped through this new perspective. So how are you thinking about life and circumstances this morning? Because James is writing about day-to-day life, and he's going to continue to, I trust, as you hear over these next weeks. When difficulties come, is there any chance of joy? Or is your reaction more like mine, like some others we mentioned earlier? Is joy at the top of the list in the midst of what we're facing, looking out beyond the present? It can be if we look out far enough and have a hope of something different tomorrow. In those instances, even though circumstances likely don't change, there's the potential that we change in the midst of those circumstances and things are different. If we don't know how to proceed, if we don't know how to take something in our lives right now, can we seek God for his guidance, his wisdom, and have confidence he'll respond, trusting that what he says will be the best direction? Anyone need wisdom right now? Me too. I use an iPad, so I I do this through email and I send it to myself and I can open it on my iPad. Unfortunately for me, that's also my work email, and I saw another one, just the title of another one. And driving here this morning, my mind was on what that other email is about that I didn't even read and don't fully know what it's about. And literally driving here, I had to think, what are you preaching on, you idiot? Wisdom. You need wisdom. Don't spend your mind from north of Hershey to south of E-Town thinking about what you're going to do about that circumstance. Ask God for wisdom. So even driving in here this morning, I needed to be reminded of that. And I haven't actually thought about it till right now, till I'm telling you all of this, because I asked God, all right, God, I don't know how to proceed here. I need your wisdom. That's why you don't check your email when you're not actually working, because then your mind gets engaged back in work, okay? Take a day off, take a Sabbath. That's bonus material. That's not James, that's me. Okay. Maybe you and I are feeling fairly secure right now. Why? Well, we don't have too many trials presently. All is good. Maybe today, though, we still need that longer perspective, because at some point they'll come, to ultimately realize where we're placing our trust, because if we're placing it in wealth or riches, it's not going to hold up over the long-term pressure of what's actually coming. We believe we're secure, but what does it actually look like? This beautiful bouquet. What we really need is Jesus. Just ask the ultimate source who authored all of these things. And just ask the source who wrote this letter. Because, James didn't get it for a while. He didn't understand that trials could actually produce something in our life. He didn't understand where to go for ultimate security. And then he met the resurrected Jesus, and things began to change. If you and I have met Jesus, this letter is for you. It'll provide practical day-to-day thoughts on life with him. But if you have yet to give Jesus full control, whether you're sitting in here this morning, whether you're watching online, today is the day. No time like the present. Because when we say yes to Jesus, and we say, my life is under yours, just like James did, then things begin to change. Doesn't mean everything changes instantly, but we have a different view. We have a longer term view in which we understand that Jesus is actually the key to moving through what we're experiencing. And we can be changed to look more and more like him. That's what I desire in my life. That's what I desire for you. And as you as individuals are doing it, and you come together and you form Kenoi BIC, that's what I desire for this church, that this church would be different. Because you all together are Jesus. To one another and to this community. To that end, let's pray.
Hi, this is Pastor Nick. Thanks for listening. I hope something that you heard today was very helpful. If you want to connect with us further, feel free to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or our website, kenoichurch.org. Sure, I'm glad we're in this together.